The Indiana Fever just traded away the 10th pick in the 2026 draft to a guard they did not need, left Aliyah Boston as the only true center on the roster, and let their coach announce she wants Caitlin Clark handling the ball less often. Clark sat down at Media Day and answered every question with complete composure, which somehow makes what she actually said even more damaging to the people running this franchise. Buried inside those calm answers are a few sentences that should make the front office and coach Stephanie White genuinely uncomfortable. Do you think Stephanie White is the right coach for Caitlin Clark? Let me know in the comments below. Let us talk about the 2 weeks leading up to the 2026 WNBA draft, because the timeline here matters a lot. Raven Johnson sat down for an interview on the I Am Next podcast and said that Caitlin Clark broke her mentally during their Iowa versus South Carolina matchups. She described how the online backlash she faced after Clark's wave-off gesture during the 2023 Final Four led to bullying and left her wanting to quit basketball entirely. That clip spread everywhere fast, so it was fresh in everybody's mind when the Indiana Fever stepped to the podium at number 10 and called her name. The fans lost it, and honestly, you can see why. The Fever's backcourt going into that draft already had Caitlin Clark, Kelsey Mitchell, Tyasha Harris, Sophie Cunningham, and Lexi Hull all fighting for minutes. 5 guards. The team's most obvious problem was not at guard, it was up front, where Indiana desperately needed size and someone who could stretch the floor and take pressure off Aliyah Boston. Analysts at Athlon Sports and Sports Illustrated both flagged the pick as a mismatch with Indiana's actual roster needs, so it was not just fans overreacting on social media. Johnson is a defensive specialist. She was the SEC Defensive Player of the Year out of South Carolina, and she is undersized for her position, with real questions about her offensive ceiling and whether she can space the floor at the WNBA level. So you have a player who does not fill the position Indiana needed, drafted into a backcourt that was already crowded, and this happened 2 weeks after she publicly described Clark as someone whose actions caused her serious emotional harm. Kelly Krauskopf and Amber Cox either did not see how bad that looked, or they did not care. And neither option sat well with Clark's fan base, who immediately started framing the whole thing as the front office actively working against their own player. But Clark didn't stay quiet on Johnson, and what she actually said flipped the conversation. During training camp, Clark talked specifically about Johnson's ability to bring the ball up the court and absorb defensive pressure across all 94 feet, which means every possession Johnson handles the ball on the bring-up is a possession where Clark isn't running 94 feet against a press or a trap before she even gets to run the offense. That's not a small thing across a 44-game season when you're also expected to shoot, facilitate, and close games. And then Clark dropped something in a separate interview that most people glossed right over. She confirmed the front office asked for her input on free agency and draft decisions throughout the entire offseason, which means she gave her blessing to the Johnson pick. The pick fans labeled a sabotage move is one Clark apparently signed off on herself. Johnson, for her part, didn't show up to training camp carrying any grudge. She went out of her way to compliment Clark, said she probably asked Clark 1,000 questions in a single day about the offense, and framed the whole situation plainly. She said, "I think that's in the past, honestly. We're teammates now and we have one goal. That's to win a championship." The locker room drama everyone braced for hasn't shown up on camera at all. So the Johnson pick looks bad on paper from a positional standpoint, sure, but Clark clearly sees a specific role for her as a ball handler and defender who takes real physical load off Clark on every trip down the floor. That shifts the real question away from whether Johnson belongs on this roster and toward whether she's actually enough to fix what the Fever got wrong this offseason, because the backcourt was never where Indiana's problems lived. While everyone was going back and forth about Raven Johnson, The Fever quietly walked through the entire free agency period and came out the other side without giving Aliyah Boston a reliable partner in the front court. The front office did add Monique Billings and Maisha Hines-Allen, but neither profiles as a stretch power forward who can shoot the three and prevent the paint from becoming clogged. There were front court options available in free agency, players who could stretch the floor, give Boston real rest minutes, and hold their own against bigger teams when the games actually matter. Indiana passed on them and kept piling up guards instead. Picture this: Boston in a playoff matchup against a team that runs two capable bigs in rotation, and she is logging 35+ minutes because there is genuinely nobody behind her who can hold the fort. By the fourth quarter, she is running on fumes. The opposing team knows it, and they go right at her every single trip down the floor. That is not a hypothetical scare story. That is what happens when one analyst flat out described the situation as Indiana having no backup for Boston. Right now, that is exactly where the Fever are headed. The stretch four that Indiana needs going into training camp was basically Justine Pissot, a second-round pick out of Vanderbilt, who signed a player development contract on April 17, 2026. Pissot is interesting because she is not your typical big. She is a 6'4" shooter with a 7-foot wingspan, which means she can shoot from the perimeter and run the floor instead of just camping in the paint. Her numbers at Vanderbilt back that up: 11.1 points per game in her final season, and 42.2% from three on 6.6 attempts per game. That shooting volume from a player her size is genuinely useful next to Clark, because it pulls defenders away from the basket and creates driving lanes that a traditional power forward just cannot open up the same way. The player development contract also means Pissot does not count against the salary cap unless Indiana converts it to a standard deal, and she can play in up to 12 games this season without losing her developmental status. So the Fever are not fully committing to her yet, and it also means they are essentially running a trial on a position they desperately needed to address with certainty. Here is where it gets interesting. Clark made a comment during training camp about preferring teammates who can shoot and run, and she was not pointing at any of the guards when she said it. Analysts connected that line directly to Pissot almost immediately, and it is hard to read it any other way. Clark knows what she needs around her to operate at her best, and a mobile shooting big who can space the floor fits that picture almost exactly. But Pissot, on a developmental deal, is not the same as a proven veteran big who steps onto the floor in Game 5 of a playoff series and competes. There is a real gap between those two things, and the Fever still have 11th and 12th roster spots that will not be locked in until just before the season opens. Those two spots are the last real window the front office has to fix the front court problem they created by spending the whole offseason adding guards. Clark's comments about shooters who can run feel less like casual praise and more like a very deliberate, very public statement about what she wants those final two spots to look like. Whether Kelly Krauskopf and Amber Cox are actually listening is a completely different question, and the coaching situation makes that question a lot more complicated. Stephanie White got in front of cameras during training camp and laid out her vision for the 2026 Fever. Play faster, defend harder, and spread the ball handling around so Clark isn't dragging the ball 94 feet on every single possession. White put it pretty plainly, saying the goal is to get Clark into the second or third action of a possession rather than initiating everything herself, and that players like Raven Johnson would help by bringing the ball up and starting the offense before handing it off to Clark. On paper, that's a workload argument. Fans heard it as Clark getting the ball less, and they weren't wrong to read it that way. White's logic isn't crazy. A 44-game season is long, and if Clark is running full court against a press or a trap every single possession, she is burning the energy that she needs later in close games. White even acknowledged that Clark can play on and off the ball, which is true. So the idea of mixing it up is not completely disconnected from how good teams actually operate. But White's defensive-first scheme only works if the defense can generate enough stops to make all of this worth it. And right now, Indiana does not have the front court depth to anchor a true defensive identity. So you are asking Clark to give up ball handling time for a defensive system the roster might not be able to actually run. Clark is most dangerous when she has the ball and space to operate. She pulls up from 30 feet and defenses have to collapse on her, which opens up driving lanes and easy looks for everyone around her. She pushes in transition before the defense can get set, and that is where she hurts teams the most. When Clark does not have the ball, that gravity drops off, and the offense loses its sharpest edge. You cannot replace what she does with more ball handling from Tyasha Harris or Raven Johnson, because neither of them forces defenses to make the same impossible choices Clark does just by holding the ball at half court. Clark didn't take a shot at White directly, but she was not pretending to agree either. At Media Day, she looked straight at the cameras and declared she was the best transition player in the league, adding that transition is where she thrives and everyone knows that is her game. You do not volunteer that sentence at a team media day unless you are drawing a line about how you expect to be used. Clark did not stop there. She cited Steph Curry and how Golden State uses him off-ball in certain stretches, not because he is less effective, but because moving without the ball forces defenses to track him as a cutter and a mover, rather than just as a ball handler, and that creates a completely different kind of chaos. Clark acknowledged that across a long season, there are moments when operating off the ball is the right call, and she is willing to do that work when it fits. That is not the same thing as endorsing what White described. Clark's Curry comparison says she understands the concept and can use it situationally, not that she wants it as the base identity for how the offense runs. Curry's off-ball movement works because Golden State already has the ball in the right hands when he moves. White's plan asks Clark to hand those initiation duties to guards who do not create the same defensive problems Clark does just by existing on the floor. White's scheme needs Clark to quietly accept a smaller role in the moments that matter most. Clark spent Media Day making it pretty clear she is not built for quiet acceptance. If you spent this offseason watching fan channels and hot take shows, you probably walked away thinking Clark spent Media Day basically filing a formal complaint against her own front office. That's not what happened. And the distance between what she actually said and what people are claiming she said is pretty wide. Clark walked into Media Day composed and specific. She talked about staying healthy across a full season, about the adjustment that comes with new teammates learning each other's habits, about trusting what the front office built. On the surface, that reads like a player doing the professional thing, staying calm, not feeding the noise. A lot of fans took her composure as evidence she was being managed or silenced, like the real Clark was being kept behind a PR wall somewhere. But pull out the specific lines and a different picture shows up. She confirmed the front office consulted her on roster decisions, both free agency and the draft. She talked about preferring teammates who can shoot and run, and she was not looking at any guards when she said it. She called herself the best transition player in the league, unprompted, at a team media event. She compared her own off-ball usage to how Golden State deploys Steph Curry, which is not the kind of comparison a passive player makes when she is just trying to stay out of trouble. Clark is not criticizing anyone by name. She is not walking up to a microphone and saying Stephanie White's plan is wrong, or that Krauskopf and Cox fumbled the offseason. What she is doing instead is describing very clearly and very specifically what she needs to perform at her best, and leaving it to anyone paying attention to figure out whether she is actually getting those things. That is a different kind of statement. It does not give the front office anything to publicly argue against without making themselves look like they are fighting their own franchise player over basketball. What Clark is actually doing is drawing a line between what she will accept situationally and what she will not accept as a base philosophy. She is willing to operate off the ball at certain moments. She said so herself, using the Steph Curry example, but she is not endorsing a system built around her not initiating. Those are two completely different things, and Clark spoke carefully enough that the distinction is there for anyone who listened closely instead of just grabbing the loudest clip. The 2026 season basically comes down to one question. Can White's defensive identity and Clark's transition game share the same floor without one of them breaking the other? Clark's media day answers made it pretty clear she has already thought through that tension and picked a side. She is not planning to quietly shrink into a role that does not fit her, and she has framed her position publicly in language that is hard to argue with without looking petty. None of the actual roster problems disappeared because Clark handled her interviews well. Boston is still the only true center on that team. The 11th and 12th roster spots are still empty. White's philosophy still asks Clark to pull back in ways Clark has made plain she does not fully accept. Those facts are sitting right where the front office left them. A healthy Clark running alongside Boston, Kelsey Mitchell, Lexi Hull, and Sophie Cunningham, with Pissot developing and 2 spots still available to fill, is a team that can compete seriously in 2026. Clark's confidence at Media Day was not a performance for the cameras. It was a player who has absorbed enough pressure over the past 2 years to know exactly which problems are worth worrying about and which ones she can play through anyway. So the frustration Clark's fans are carrying into 2026 is not manufactured. The bigs did not get signed, the 2 roster spots are still empty, and White's scheme asks Clark to pull back in ways Clark has publicly said she will not accept as a permanent identity. But Clark already told you what she needs, confirmed she had input on how this roster got built, and used Steph Curry to explain exactly how she plans to operate inside a system she does not fully buy into. White's defensive philosophy and Clark's transition game cannot both win. One of them gives way first, and Clark has already placed her BET. Do you think Stephanie White is the right coach for Caitlin Clark? Let me know in the comments. Please like and subscribe, and turn on all notifications so you never miss out. Click the video on the screen, and we will see you in the next one.